Hi everyone, welcome to another lesson at CSEC Physics Syllabus at EDU Solutions Institute. In today's lesson, we'll be focusing on motion and more specifically, motion graphs. So stay tuned as we delve in this motion graph situation. Now in today's lesson, we'll be looking at motion graph, some terms that we will discuss during motion, as well as to look at the basic shape of each motion graph that we will focus on. Now, the first thing that we need to know are some 5 basic terms. First term is speed, and speed has to do with the rate of covering a specific distance. So hence, if we move from point A to point B, and the distance between is 50 meters, then the speed is how much meters within that 50 are we covering every second. So that's what speed is. Now velocity is quite similar, but it has to do with straight line movement. So we talk about it is speed with a direction. So we have to consider what direction is the object moving, right? And it's the rate at which it's moving in that specific direction. And then we distinguish between distance. Now distance is the length between 2 points that we have traveled. So if we look at from point A to point B, the path we take to reach there, that total length is called your distance. Now for displacement is slightly different. Now displacement, you don't have to travel that specific path. But if you move from point A to point B, and we connect these 2 points with a straight line, then we say that length of that straight line is your displacement. Now also we should consider that if we move from point A, we go around different paths and then we end up back at point A, our total displacement would be 0 because there is no length between the starting point and the ending point. And then finally we look at acceleration. Now acceleration is how fast are we changing our velocity or our speed. Right? So in common terms, we will use terms like the object is speeding up, which means that it is changing from its velocity from here to a higher velocity within a given time period. Now, if we focus on motion graphs, all these terms, we can actually explain the motion of objects using graphs. Now, we have 2 types of graphs that we're going to focus on, a distance time graph and a speed time graph. In distance time graph, what does this mean? So it means that distance is on our y-axis, which is measured in meters, and time will always be on our x-axis, measured in seconds. Now, in distance time graph, which could be displacement time graph, with the same principle that applies, then we have different shape of lines that will interpret to mean different motion. So let's identify the different shapes that we can have. Right? So let's take a red line and let's do one that goes horizontally. Right? Then we're going to take a yellow line. We're going to do one that is going horizontally. We can use a pink line with one that will be curving up like this, and then we can use a green line with one that will be going curving like that. Now, what do these lines mean? Now, if we have a green line, so for the green line, if we have a line that looks like this, it curves up, then it's coming down, then what that means is that the object is moving at a distance. Right? Because distance on the y-axis is increasing. But specifically, it also tells us that the speed of this object is decreasing. And if we want to know how we know that, we just think about the curve it's coming down. And so it's simplifying that the speed is also coming down as well. So it starts with a fast speed, and then it's slowing down close to the end. All right, and then we look at our pink line. This is the other curve, right? And this one now is curving upwards. So in this case, we know that it's traveling some distance and its speed is increasing. Right? So again, it will start off slow, and then it starts to pick up speed close to the end of its journey. All right, then let's look at our yellow line. And our yellow line is a horizontal line from a specific distance. So if we put this number as 5, we notice as time changes, it's still at 5 distances. And the simple term to say that is that the object is at rest. It's not moving. So it's stationary at that 5 position mark. Right? And then finally, we look at our red line. And our red is a diagonal line, straight diagonal line. Right? So it's different from the green and the pink one. And this means that it is moving as well, but this time the speed is constant. So it's not changing speed. So just like a car that moves at 50 kilometers per hour constantly, then that's what the red line will simplify. That it's changing distance at the same time period. So if we say every 2 seconds, it's going 5 meters each time. So in the first 2 seconds, it's 5 meters. The next 2 seconds after that would also add 5 more meters to it, and it continues like that. So these are the different shapes that our motion graph can give. And these describes what's happening to the object. Now, one last thing on this motion graph is to identify that if we find the gradient of these lines, it will give us speed that the object is moving. This is why we know that for the yellow line, because it's a horizontal line, then its displacement is 0. So we see here that our distance time graphs do give us that opportunity to describe motion using just lines, right? So notice there is not even numbers that's needed. The numbers would just make the information that we're telling to be more specific. All right, so let's now look into our speed time graphs. Now, with speed time graph, again, we will always have the first one on the y-axis, so that's speed, and it's measured in meters per second, and time will always be on your x-axis. Now, the same lines we're going to use to represent these information, but we're going to add one. Let's add a brown one, and this brown one is going to be one that comes down like this. All right, so let's start with the brown one. Now, with the brown line, would represent that the speed is coming from a high number to a low number. So that tells us that the speed is decreasing. The line is a constant straight line, so it is at a constant rate. All right, so because it's a straight line, it's a constant rate of decrease. All right, now the opposite would be for the red line, because the red line now is going up instead of down. So that tells us that speed is increasing. And it's a straight line, so it's at a constant rate. Good. Now let's look at our green line. So the green line is the one now that is going up, then curving down. And what this means is that it is increasing in speed, right? Because the speed is still going up. So increasing in speed, but at a decreasing rate. The rate at which it's increasing in speed is getting smaller and smaller. So for the start, it means that if it moved from 5 to 10 meters per second, it did it very fast, right? So therefore, when it's going to the end part now, if it's going to do that same increase in speed, it's going to take a longer time to do that. So therefore, the rate of changing in speed gets smaller. All right, then we look at the pink line. The pink line will be the opposite, because the pink line is curving upwards. So therefore, it means that it is also increasing in speed, but at an increasing rate. Finally, it is our yellow line. And our yellow line is constantly horizontal at a speed. So therefore, it's moving at a constant speed, right? So therefore, it's not changing its speed. If it was 50, it remains at 50 as time goes by. Now, as you notice here, we use the word rate. Now, another word that we could use for rate would be acceleration. So instead of using rate, we could use the word acceleration, right? Which tells us we're changing speed. All right, now the final thing about speed time graph is to identify two things. That if we find the area under the lines, it gives the distance that was moved. So therefore, if we isolate any of these lines and we find the area of that line, the area under the line itself, we get the distance that was moved. And also, if we find the gradient of the line, then we get the acceleration of the object. All right? So these are just information that we are going to use in our next lesson, because we're going to now manipulate these equations to get different information about the objects moving. Right? So I hope you understand a little bit more about motion graphs. Right? It was an informative lesson, very short and spicy. So I'll see you next week where we are going to use what we learned now in using for questions to come. So enjoy your time and I'll see you next week.